Some houses are just wood and stone. They're shelters, investments, a place to keep the rain out. But a rare few, they become something else. They become diaries, written in marble and glass, their hallways echoing with laughter and secrets long after everyone has gone. And deep in the woods of Cortlandt Manor, New York, sits a house that is more of a question than a home. A circular, futuristic marvel, slowly being reclaimed by nature. It's a place built to escape the world, that the world has now all but forgotten. This wasn't just a house to the man they called the Great One. It was a statement, a fortress of solitude, a party palace, and maybe a hiding place. To understand why a man at the absolute peak of his fame would build something so otherworldly, you can't start with the house. You have to start with the hole in his life that he tried to fill with it. Before the standing ovations, before the catchphrases that echoed through a generation of American living rooms, there was Herbert John Gleason, a kid from a dingy Brooklyn flat at 328 Chauncey Street, a cramped, dark apartment that would later become the blueprint for the most famous fictional apartment in television history. His childhood wasn't just humble, it was fractured. When he was just 9 years old, his father, an insurance clerk, walked out of their apartment to cash his paycheck and never came back. He vanished without a trace, leaving behind an empty space where a father should have been. 10 years later, his mother, May, died of sepsis from a neck infection. At 19, Jackie Gleason was an orphan, alone with 36 cents in his pocket, and a pain he would spend the rest of his life trying to outrun, outdrink, and outbuild. He was a man with a photographic memory and perfect pitch, but the two things he could never forget were the silence of his father's departure and the finality of his mother's death. This fear of being alone, of abandonment, would become the architect of his entire life. And so, he built a personality as big as a skyscraper to live inside. The Great One was born, a comedian of immense raw talent. He was loud, brash, and unapologetically alive. He filled every room he entered, a human supernova who refused to be ignored. By the 1950s, he was one of the most powerful men in television. CBS handed him a record-breaking $11 million contract, a figure so staggering it was mythologized to have been written on a napkin. He had it all: the fame, the money, the adoration of millions. In 1959, at the height of his fame, Gleason poured a fortune, $650,000 in period money, the equivalent of over $6 million today, into 8.5 acres of secluded woodland. This was to be his escape pod. He commissioned architect Robert Sheika to design not just a home, but a fleet. The main house was the mothership. A smaller matching guest house was the scout ship. And even the storage building was a perfect circle. Everything was round. He was obsessed with the idea. He told friends that spirits couldn't haunt a house with no corners. But it was more than just a nod to his lifelong, deeply serious interest in UFOs and the paranormal. The circle, he said, was like a musical note that never ends. It was a continuous, unbroken line, a symbol of permanence for a man whose life had been defined by abrupt, painful endings. The construction itself was a spectacle. The prefabricated sections were built by a Norwegian shipbuilder inside an airplane hangar, then painstakingly assembled on site. The woodwork, all hand-bent with steam. The centerpiece was a colossal 40-foot tall, three-sided fireplace made of Italian marble. Gleason was so exacting, he bought the entire quarry in Italy to ensure the marble would be flawless, and flew the stonemasons over to build it. This wasn't a family home. This was Gleason's personal playground, a monument to his own myth. And the parties were legendary. This was where the Rat Pack came to unwind. Frank Sinatra, a regular, would croon into a microphone that rose pneumatically from the marble floor. Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio were guests. The main bar was a sweeping 14-person crescent of carved wood, designed with massive sturdy bar stools that, as Gleason liked to boast, were impossible to fall out of no matter how much you'd had to drink. There were, in fact, 4 separate bars in the house. This was a place designed for excess, for laughter that would drown out the silence of the surrounding woods. His office was his command center. With a spin of his chair, he could move from his desk to a built-in organ. He could even broadcast directly from the room. It was a space of total control, a world he could manipulate with the flick of a switch. The master bedroom featured a massive 8-foot-wide circular bed with a television mounted on the ceiling. It was the ultimate bachelor pad, built while he was still legally married to his first wife, Genevieve Halford, the mother of his 2 daughters. But while he was building this fantasy world, his real world was fracturing. His relationship with his daughters was distant, strained. In a heartbreaking interview years later, his daughter Linda admitted her father never helped her in her own acting career. His grandson, the actor Jason Patrick, would speak of a childhood marked by poverty, despite his grandfather's immense wealth. He recalled barely knowing the man the world adored. The Great One was a stranger. This house, this mothership, wasn't for them. It was a fortress built to keep the demands of real life, of family, of emotional connection, at bay. It was a stage, and on it, Jackie Gleason was always performing. But no performance can last forever. The fantasy began to crumble. By 1964, Gleason had a revelation. A friend told him that in Florida, he could play golf year-round. It was a simple, almost comical reason, but it was enough. He packed up his entire television show, cast and crew, and moved his whole operation from the heart of New York City to Miami Beach. The mothership, his grand futuristic statement in the woods, was sold to a CBS executive. The dream was abandoned almost as quickly as it was built. It has since passed through a few hands, at one point selling for a mere $150,000 in 1976. For years, it has been on and off the market, a magnificent multi-million-dollar enigma that no one seems to know what to do with. A lonely spaceship waiting for a pilot who is never coming back. Florida represented a new chapter. If the mothership was his war room, a place of conquest and performance, his final home in the Inverrary Golf community near Fort Lauderdale was meant to be his sanctuary. He bought it in 1971, a large, comfortable house right on the lake, steps from the golf course that had become his obsession. This house was different. It wasn't built to impress the world, but to comfort the man, and that was largely because of one person, Marilyn Taylor, the younger sister of his show's famous choreographer, June Taylor. Jackie had fallen in love with Marilyn in the 1950s, a deep, abiding love that was thwarted for decades. His first wife, a devout Catholic, long refused a divorce. For years, Jackie and Marilyn's love was a whispered headline, a source of scandal and heartbreak. But finally, in 1975, they were married, and in this Florida house, the Great One finally seemed to find a semblance of peace. This house reflected a different Gleason. Yes, it was still a place for entertaining, with a massive dining room overlooking the lake and, of course, a bar. This one sunken, with custom chairs to prevent guests from tipping over. He hosted presidents like Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford, and golf legends. His vast library wasn't just for show. After his death, his family donated over 1,700 of his personal books to the University of Miami. The subject? Almost exclusively parapsychology, UFOs, and life after death. It was the library of a man still searching for answers, still wrestling with the great unknowable questions that had haunted him since childhood. This home became his refuge, especially as his health began to fail. He had battled his weight his entire life, was a notorious drinker and smoker. After a heart surgery, he moderated, but never quit. He was a man who lived life on his own terms, right to the very end. In 1986, during the filming of his last movie, Nothing in Common with Tom Hanks, doctors discovered he had colon cancer that had already spread to his liver. They gave him months. He refused treatment. He knew the show was over. He wanted to go home. And it was in this house, surrounded by the comfort he had built with Marilyn, that Jackie Gleason prepared for his final exit. And here, in his last moments, came the most tragic and telling chapter of his story. The day before he died, on June 23, 1987, Jackie Gleason amended his will. He was so weak he couldn't sign his own name. A business associate had to sign for him. In the original will, his wife Marilyn was to receive half of his considerable estate, with the remainder going to his two daughters, Geraldine and Linda. But in the new version, his wife's share was cut to 1/3. His daughter's inheritance remained the same. The difference? A bequest of $100,000 to his longtime loyal secretary. It was a final perplexing act, a gesture that, on the surface, seemed to diminish the portion for the woman who was the undisputed love of his life in favor of his staff. What was this final message? A settling of accounts? A last impulsive act of a mind clouded by illness? Or a final misguided attempt to take care of everyone that ended up feeling like a slight to the one who mattered most? We will never truly know. He died the next day, June 24, 1987, in his own bed in the house he finally considered home. He was 71 years old, and here is the final haunting twist. After his death, Marilyn continued to live in the house for several years. When she finally sold it, it was with one extraordinary condition. Everything had to stay. The furniture, the paintings, the books, the personal mementos. And the buyer agreed. For decades, Jackie Gleason's last home remained a perfect time capsule, a shrine to the man who lived there. When that owner passed away, the house went up for sale again, a ghost of the 1970s filled with the spirit of the great one, his custom-made George Dickel whiskey bottle still at the bar, the billfish he caught still on the wall, a life perfectly preserved, waiting for its owner to return. In the end, Jackie Gleason built two houses that told the story of his life. One was a fantasy, a futuristic fortress built against the loneliness of his past, a place that was ultimately as hollow and transient as fame itself. The other was a sanctuary, a place where he could finally stop performing and just be. But what these homes truly reveal is the story of a man who, despite being one of the most beloved figures of his century, was always searching for something he never quite found, a sense of belonging, the unbroken circle he tried to build in the woods. He filled his houses with everything money could buy, but the echoes that remain are not of grandeur, but of a profound and very human longing, a longing for a home he could never quite reach, a longing for the lights of Chauncey Street to finally welcome him back. How sweet and how tragic it is. And that's all for today's video. Don't forget to leave a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe so you'll always be in the loop. Thanks for watching.